Dabi may be one of the most interesting and most tragic villains we have in My Hero Academia. And from what we got with the most recent chapter, we pretty much have his entire story laid out in front of us. And today, I want to go over the tragedy that is Dabi. Spoilers, this is your only chance. Now, let's hit that intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy Manga Drew, and I'm here to do a video all about Dabi, our smelly, disfigured, burnt to a crisp of a man. And what we're going to do in this video is that we're going to go over how Dabi became Dabi. Because in the most recent chapter, we pretty much get the confirmation of the point where Dabi became who he is. And once again, spoilers for the manga if you haven't seen it, we know who Dabi's true identity is. And in this video, I just want to go over what led him down this path and if it was an inevitability or if it's something that could have been changed. So let's start off with a short intro for who Dabi is. Dabi is 24 years old and was born January 18th. Currently, his quirk is unknown, but has been dubbed cremation by the fandom. We learned earlier on in the story during the war that Dabi is actually the eldest son, aka Toya Todoroki. He is the eldest son of Endeavor, or Inji Todoroki, and is the son of his mother, Rei Todoroki. Dabi, aka Toya, is the oldest son of the Todoroki siblings, consisting of Natsuo, Fuyumi, who is the oldest daughter, and Shoto, who is the youngest son. And from what we've seen from Toya's backstory and from his family interactions, we see that he was not grown in the best of environments, and that possibly due to his own birth, he was always destined to fall. Toya was born prematurely, which means that at his birth, he was not born under the best circumstances. Because he was born premature, that means that his growth was stunted, which is why he appears a lot younger in the story when he was a child than he does in comparison to his other siblings. And that even though it's not confirmed, it's very possible that because of his premature status, that it could have affected his ability to use his quirk, or could have been a reasoning why he has the disposition of his mother to handle ice powers, but has a greater fire power than his own father. And Toya being born premature shows that he potentially had faults within him due to his birth. And as we learned in chapter 350, those faults, or those twisted seeds that Dr. Garaki and all four of them were looking for, would most likely lie inside of Toya, inside of Dabi, just from the fact that he was born. And as we see later on, Toya at a very young age was trained by Inji to be able to use his fire power. And that during this time, Inji placed all of his ambitions on his eldest son. That did not stop Inji from trying to create a child with the perfect blend of fire and ice, but he put all of his faith and ambition into Toya, and that was also another reason why Toya may have been destined to fall, because Inji from birth put the ambitions on Toya to become a hero to surpass All Might, which, as Toya said in his flashback, lit a fire inside of him that could not be put out. And that the trials and tribulations that Toya would have to face would not just be limited to Inji and his training, but also to his own biology. Because what we learned in the story is that both Inji and Rei learned about Toya's disposition, his inability to be resistant to fire and is more resistant to ice, which means that the fire that he has will burn him because he does not have the immunity to it or the resistance to it. This means that from birth, Toya was never going to be able to adhere to the ambitions of his father, and most likely than not would not become a great hero because of his inability to be able to be a hero without harming himself, which is a very fun criticism that we see through Deku in the story through Aizawa, how Deku cannot be an effective hero if his powers cause him to harm himself and become more of a hindrance than a help. And this can pretty much build up the idea that Toya, from his birth, from his conception, was not going to be able to live a great life in this world, in a society where Endeavor is pushing him to be a hero, while the standard for all children is the dream of being a hero. But Toya, at a young age, is straight up unable to be a hero because his quirk is hurting himself. But even though Toya knew that training with his quirk would cause him harm, he continued to train and train and train to regain the love and compassion from his father that he lost the moment that Enji realized that his ambitions would not be met with Toya. And that this began a spiral inside of Toya to become obsessed with his father. And that this eventually leads to Endeavor making the worst decision he could have ever made. Continuing to strive to find the perfect child, the perfect blend between his fire and Rei's ice. And he succeeds. Because through Enji's success with the birth of Shoto would cause Toya to break, causing him to lash out and attempt to kill his own younger brother. This is the moment where Toya began to fall and never come back. Because of that incident and because of the actions that Toya took, it caused Endeavor to take even more drastic measures that separated Toya even further away from his father, which caused him to become even more obsessed with him. It fueled the fire inside of him to continue to train, even at the extent of burning himself and burn marks appearing on his body more and more. Because even though Toya had good relationships with his siblings, his obsession to gain his father's favor, his father's love, his father's praise caused him to lash out at his family, even to the point of saying horrible and harsh words to his own mother, which leads to probably the final nail in the coffin that would eventually lead Toya to fall into ashes. The realization that his flames are connected to his emotions. Because through that realization and Enji Todoroki not appearing to Toya when he asked his own father to come to Sekko Peak, his emotions, his disappointment over his father not coming overcame Toya like a roaring flame, setting himself ablaze, covering the forest in fire, and leading to the quote-unquote death of Toya Todoroki. And it was at that moment that Toya died, or so we thought. It was later revealed in the most recent chapter that Toya was actually rescued by All For One and was in a coma for 3 years. And that during that time, most likely than not, he went through puberty, his body grew, his voice changed, and he was unrecognizable even to himself. At the moment that he wakes up, Toya felt regret, he felt pain, he felt sorry, he wanted to apologize for his actions, for what he said, but even though he wanted to apologize, there was still a slight darkness inside of him, his obsession with Endeavor, because when he was faced by the individuals keeping him captured at the orphanage, a single phrase caused Toya to retaliate in anger, the phrase that he was a failure, which eventually led Toya to potentially killing multiple children and burning down the orphanage and returning back to his family. But unfortunately, Toya returning back to his family was truly when Toya died and Dabi was born. Because the moment that Dabi came into existence is the moment that Toya saw that his death apparently did not change his father. That Endeavor was still training Shoto to surpass All Might, and Toya believed that his father had forgotten him. And due to that moment, Toya truly died that day with the birth of Dabi. So the real question is, why did Toya become Dabi? For starters, the trauma and abuse that he faced by Endeavor most likely was a huge catalyst for what caused Toya to become Dabi. The abuse, the neglect, the inability for Endeavor to communicate with his own son, is a core catalyst for why Toya became Dabi. But it is not the only and may not even be the main reason for that. Because I believe the main reason why Toya would eventually become Dabi is just because he was born defective. He was born twisted. Because from what we saw with Dr. Garaki and All For One, they sought out children that were twisted inside of them from birth. And as we saw with Toya, he matched that description, which is why he was taken to the orphanage. Which means even if Endeavor did treat Toya better, did not abuse him, did not neglect him, there is still a very high chance that the Doctor and All For One would go after and find Toya because he was just an individual born as a twisted seed. Meaning that it is still very possible, if not very likely, he still could have ended up as a villain, or would have potentially still have died from him being trained to use his quirk and being deemed a failure and either being left down in the street for him to die potentially. Another reason that Toya became Dabi, and this is probably the saddest and most tragic part of it, is that Toya became Dabi from a misunderstanding or a grudge that was misunderstood. Because as we saw, the point where Toya became Dabi is because he saw that Endeavor did not change because he was still training Shoto, and that he believed that the family had forgotten him and moved on. But in reality, it was the exact opposite. Rei got worse after Toya's death because of the abuse that Endeavor put her through, which eventually leads to her accidentally attacking Shoto, leaving the scar, and eventually being put into a mental institution or a mental hospital. And we hear later on that the reasoning why Endeavor didn't quote-unquote change is because he believed that there was no going back. He pushed Shoto more and more, not just because of his goal to have Shoto surpass All Might, but it was also the guilt of him killing his own son pushing him to do this as well. He may have created his son as a way to surpass All Might, but he still cared for him. He still loved him. Even though he didn't give him the attention that Toya wanted, he did it because he didn't want to see his son burning himself to death. Not just because he could never surpass All Might, but also for his own well-being. And we truly see this guilt as we see that he prays in front of a shrine erected to the death of his own son as he feels guilty and prays to it, what we assume every time he goes and stays at home. And how it ties more into the idea about how he was looking for fire-based users at his own agency in the hopes that his own son was still alive. Even Natsuo, who never forgave his father for his older brother's death, holds that over Enji's head entirely, showing that he also never moved on from his older brother's death. So all of this shows that the Todoroki family never actually forgot Toya and never really moved on. But because of this single misunderstanding, it was the final point in the story where Toya finally and officially died and Dabi was born. And that through the teachings of Stain, and that because he harbored the revenge inside of him for his own father and allowed for his quirk to grow more and more, even though it was killing him, even though over the past 8 years he should be dead but is still alive, it's because of that rage, that anger, that grudge for his father that keeps him moving. And that the teachings of Stain eventually allowed for this grudge to take more of a form, leading to the plan that he eventually came up with to try and break Endeavor and destroy everything Endeavor cares and loves about right before he begins to end his own life. So with all of this in mind, the tragedy that is Toya Todoroki is that he was pretty much born in a world where he was doomed to fall, where he was born twisted and most likely be taken advantage of or kidnapped by All For One and Dr. Garaki. He was born in society where he had a quirk that could not feasibly allow him to be a hero effectively at the risk of his own life. and that he was born of an obsession and an ambition inside of Endeavor that lit a flame inside of him that could not be put out, which eventually leads him to burning to death and eventually falling into the hands of the villains nevertheless. Toya Todoroki is a cautionary tale, and that sometimes the best way to survive in this world is to not be born at all, and that the only way that Toya Todoroki could have avoided these tragedies and avoided his own downfall is just not to have existed in the world as he is. That is the tragedy of Toya Todoroki. That is the tragedy that is Dabi. So yeah, that's pretty much the video. Yeah, this is kind of a different video that I really wanted to do. It's kind of inspired by Meti Not the Bad Guy and how he did the tragedy of. I wanted to do something very similar with Dabi because I do believe that when it comes to Dabi, when it comes to Toya, he really is a tragic figure in the My Hero Academia world, just from the circumstances that he came up with Endeavor, his birth, All for One, all of that. So I wanted to do a little bit of a different video. So yeah, it's this video. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed recording it, and hopefully I'm going to enjoy editing it. So all I can ask you is, what did you think? Did you like this video? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. I would really like to read them and get a little bit more feedback, and if I should do something very similar to other characters such as Himiko Toga, or even some of the other smaller characters like Sarah or Kota. I would really like to do a video like this with Kota, because I think Kota is very underrated when it comes to his development in the series. So leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more content like this, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!